Jasmine Reynolds watches in disbelief as her frozen assets notification halts Skylight's entire operation. Flights grounded worldwide. Across the terminal, CEO Richard Thornton's face drains of color as he realizes who she really is. Not just another black passenger they bumped, but the woman controlling their financial future. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed discrimination in action, and subscribe to hear more stories about people fighting back against injustice. Now let's rewind to see how a brilliant CEO turned the tables on a corporation that made the worst mistake of their existence. Jasmine Reynolds wasn't born into privilege. Growing up in a struggling neighborhood in Detroit, she learned early that the world wouldn't hand her anything. She'd have to work twice as hard for half the recognition. Her mother, a high school math teacher, sacrificed everything to provide her daughter with educational opportunities, often working 3 jobs to make ends meet. Jasmine's natural brilliance with technology emerged in middle school when she reprogrammed the outdated computers in the school lab to run more efficiently. By 16, Jasmine was developing her own software while other teens were focused on social media. She earned a full scholarship to MIT, where she graduated top of her class with dual degrees in computer science and business. Even then, at job fairs, recruiters would often bypass her to speak with her white male classmates, assuming she wasn't qualified despite her superior credentials. Rather than fight an uphill battle in someone else's company, Jasmine decided to build her own. She founded Nextech Solutions from her tiny apartment with just 2 part-time programmers. Her innovative security software caught the attention of several major corporations, and within 5 years, Nextech had grown from a scrappy startup to a technological powerhouse. Now, at 34, Jasmine had transformed Nextech into a unicorn, valued at $3.8 billion, with offices in 12 countries and over 800 employees. Success hadn't changed her fundamental approach to business. She remained hands-on, brilliant, and demanding of excellence. Her reputation for technical innovation was matched only by her commitment to creating opportunities for underrepresented groups in tech. 20% of Nextech's profits funded STEM education in low-income communities. This Tuesday morning, Jasmine was preparing for perhaps the most important meeting of her career. A consortium of international investors was considering a partnership that would allow Nextech to expand into emerging markets across Africa and Southeast Asia. The potential deal would add another $1 billion to the company's valuation and create thousands of jobs. Jasmine had been working 18-hour days for weeks to perfect her presentation. "Everything's confirmed, Jasmine," her executive assistant Anthony said, handing her a folder with her travel documents. "First-class ticket on Skylight. Departure at 11:45. Your hotel is booked in San Francisco, and the car service will be waiting when you land." Jasmine nodded gratefully. "Thanks, Anthony. You're a lifesaver." "The investors are excited to meet you," Anthony added. "The preliminary feedback on our proposal has been extremely positive." "Let's not celebrate yet," Jasmine replied, though she allowed herself a small smile. There's still plenty that could go wrong. She had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. At the airport, Jasmine moved efficiently through security, her carry-on containing only essentials: her laptop, tablet, presentation materials, and a change of clothes. She never checked bags. Too many horror stories about lost luggage derailing important meetings. As she settled into her first-class seat on the Skylight flight, Jasmine finally allowed herself to take a deep breath. The cabin was still mostly empty, with only a few other passengers finding their seats. She took out her tablet to review her presentation one more time. A flight attendant approached with a professional smile. "Welcome aboard, ma'am. May I offer you a pre-departure beverage?" "Water would be great, thank you," Jasmine replied. The flight attendant, whose name tag read Beverly, returned moments later with the water. As she handed it over, her eyes flickered to Jasmine's face, then down to her first-class seat, a subtle double-take that Jasmine had experienced countless times before. "Is this your first time flying first class with us?" Beverly asked, her tone carrying an unmistakable note of suspicion. "No," Jasmine replied evenly. "I fly Skylight frequently for business." Beverly's smile tightened. May I see your boarding pass again? Just to confirm. Jasmine handed over her phone with the digital boarding pass displayed. Beverly scrutinized it for much longer than necessary, then reluctantly handed it back. "Thank you, Ms. Reynolds," she said, emphasizing the name as if questioning its authenticity. Jasmine returned to her presentation, ignoring the stares from a couple across the aisle. She was used to being the only black person in first-class cabins, in boardrooms, at exclusive events. The constant questioning of whether she belonged had become background noise in her life, irritating but not worth her energy. The boarding process continued until the plane was nearly full. Just as the cabin crew was preparing to close the doors, a commotion arose near the entrance. A late passenger had arrived, breathing heavily as if he'd run to make the flight. "I'm so sorry," the man announced loudly to no one in particular. "Conference call ran late. Absolutely couldn't be helped." He was in his 60s, white-haired and wearing an expensive suit that strained slightly at his midsection. He carried a leather briefcase that looked like it cost more than most people's monthly rent. Beverly immediately rushed to assist him. "No problem at all, sir. Let me help you find your seat." The man, still catching his breath, looked at his boarding pass and then at the seat numbers. His gaze landed on Jasmine, and his expression changed from harried to affronted. "There must be some mistake," he said loudly. "I always sit in 2A. Always." Beverly checked his ticket. "Actually, sir, you're assigned to 4C today." "That's unacceptable," the man declared. "I'm Walter Kensington III. I've been a Skylight Diamond member for 15 years. I cannot sit in 4C. "Let me see what I can do," Beverly said immediately, solicitous. She looked around the cabin, and her eyes landed on Jasmine. Walking over, Beverly leaned down and lowered her voice. "Excuse me, would you mind moving to another seat? We have a valued member who prefers this particular location." Jasmine looked up from her tablet. "I'm sorry, but I specifically booked this seat. I need the extra workspace for an important presentation I'm finalizing." Beverly's expression hardened. "It would be a courtesy to accommodate Mr. Kensington. Perhaps one of the other first-class seats would suffice?" "I'm sure another first-class seat would suffice for Mr. Kensington as well," Jasmine replied calmly. "I've already settled in, and I'm in my assigned seat." Walter Kensington approached, inserting himself into the conversation. "Is there a problem here?" "No problem, sir," Jasmine said firmly. "I'm in my assigned seat preparing for an important business meeting." Kensington looked at Jasmine as if she were a child who had spoken out of turn. "Young lady, perhaps you don't understand. I always sit in 2A. "Sir, your assigned seat is 4C, Jasmine repeated, maintaining her composure. "I'm in my correct seat," Beverly interjected. "Sir, let me speak with the flight manager. I'm sure we can sort this out." As Beverly walked away, Kensington remained standing over Jasmine, his presence intentionally intimidating. "I don't know how you ended up in this seat, but there's clearly been a mistake." The implication was clear. The mistake was that Jasmine was sitting in first class at all. The flight manager arrived quickly, a tall man with thinning hair and a practiced customer service expression. His name tag identified him as Thomas. "What seems to be the issue?" Thomas asked, though his attention was directed solely at Walter Kensington, completely ignoring Jasmine. "This is my seat," Kensington stated flatly. "I always sit in 2A. Thomas turned to Jasmine, his expression instantly shifting to one of suspicion. "Ma'am, can I see your boarding pass, please?" Jasmine displayed her digital boarding pass once. Again. "As you can see, I'm in my assigned seat." Thomas studied it with exaggerated scrutiny. "And may I see some identification as well?" "You didn't ask to see his ID," Jasmine pointed out. "Standard procedure," Thomas replied, though it clearly wasn't. "I need to verify all passengers' identities." The cabin had grown quiet, with nearby passengers watching the scene unfold. Most averted their eyes when Jasmine glanced their way, unwilling to get involved. Jasmine took out her driver's license and handed it over along with her company ID badge that identified her as CEO of Nextech Solutions. Thomas barely glanced at the company credentials. "Anyone can print a badge," I need government-issued identification, only. I just gave you my driver's license, Jasmine said, her patience wearing thin. And Mr. Kensington hasn't provided any identification at all. I don't need to see Mr. Kensington's ID. He's a known Diamond member, Thomas said dismissively. I've never seen her in first class before, Beverly added as if this were relevant evidence. I find that hard to believe since I've flown Skylight first class at least 20 times this year alone, Jasmine countered. You can check my frequent flyer status. Thomas made no move to verify her claim. Instead, he returned her ID and turned to Kensington. Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience. Let me see what we can do to resolve this situation. The situation is simple, Kensington said loudly. I sit in 2A. I always sit in 2A. A murmur ran through the cabin as other passengers grew restless. The flight was now delayed because of this confrontation. Sir, Jasmine addressed Thomas directly. I'm a CEO heading to an important investor meeting in San Francisco. I booked and paid for this specific seat weeks ago. Mr. Kensington is welcome to sit in his assigned seat, which is 4C. Thomas's expression darkened at being challenged. Ma'am, your tone is becoming disruptive. My tone? Jasmine asked incredulously. I'm simply stating facts. Thomas leaned closer, lowering his voice threateningly. If you continue to be uncooperative, I'll have to ask security to escort you off the aircraft. For sitting in my assigned seat? Jasmine asked, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. From several rows back, a woman's voice called out, She's right. She was sitting there when I boarded. The man came in late. Jasmine turned to see another black woman, professionally dressed, looking concerned about the situation. Thomas ignored the comment completely. Last chance, ma'am. Will you relocate to accommodate Mr. Kensington? No, Jasmine said firmly. I will not be moved from the seat I booked and paid for because someone else wants it. That's discriminatory and against your own company policies. Thomas straightened up. That's it. I'm calling security. He picked up the cabin phone and made a brief call. Within minutes, 2 security officers boarded the plane. This passenger is being disruptive and refusing to comply with crew instructions, Thomas informed them, gesturing toward Jasmine. That's not true, Jasmine protested. I'm simply sitting in my assigned seat. This is discrimination, plain and simple. The security officers, both white men, immediately took Thomas's side. Ma'am, you need to gather your belongings and come with us. This is outrageous, Jasmine said, her voice steady despite her rising anger. I have done nothing wrong. Ma'am, we can do this the easy way or the hard way, one officer warned. Aware that arguing further could escalate into a physically dangerous situation, Jasmine began collecting her things. As she stood, the woman, who had spoken up earlier, approached. My name is Dr. Maya Johnson, she said quickly. I witnessed everything. This is absolutely discriminatory treatment. I'm happy to provide my contact information as a witness. Return to your seat, ma'am, one of the security officers ordered Dr. Johnson. This is wrong, Dr. Johnson insisted. You're removing her because she's black, not because she did anything wrong. That's a serious accusation, Thomas snapped. We're removing her because she's being disruptive. As Jasmine was being escorted down the aisle, one of the officers gripped her arm unnecessarily tight. She winced, but didn't resist, aware that any reaction could be used against her. Walter Kensington was already settling into her former seat, a satisfied expression on his face. Beverly was helping him stow his briefcase, providing the attentive service she had never offered to Jasmine. The walk through the cabin was humiliating. Dozens of eyes watching, some with pity, others with judgment, most simply relieved the problem was being removed so their flight could depart. When they reached the door, Jasmine realized one of the security officers was roughly handling her laptop bag. Please be careful with that, she said. It contains sensitive business information. The officer responded by gripping it even more, carelessly, allowing it to bang against the doorframe as they exited. Jasmine heard a cracking sound that told her the laptop inside was likely damaged. In the jetway, Jasmine finally pulled her arm free. Don't touch me, I can walk on my own. Watch your attitude, the officer warned. They escorted her all the way to the terminal, where they finally released her, leaving her standing alone with her belongings while they remained nearby, watching as if she might try to rush back onto the plane. Jasmine's hands trembled slightly as she checked her laptop. The screen was indeed cracked, and the case was damaged as well. Years of important data, including her presentation for tomorrow's meeting, were at risk. She pulled out her phone to call Anthony. When he answered, she struggled to keep her voice steady. "Anthony, I need your help. I've been removed from my flight." "What? Why?" he asked, shocked. "A white passenger wanted my seat, and when I refused to give it up, they called security and forced me off the plane." She gave him a quick summary of the events. "That's illegal," Anthony said, outraged. "We need to get you to San Francisco. Let me look for alternative flights." As Jasmine waited, she watched through the terminal windows as her original flight finally pushed back from the gate, Walter Kensington comfortably seated where she should have been. In that moment, something crystallized within Jasmine. Throughout her life and career, she had dealt with racism by working harder, proving herself through excellence and choosing her battles carefully. But this time was different. She had been publicly humiliated, physically manhandled, and potentially cost $1 billion deal because of one company's blatant discrimination. This time, she would not let it stand. "Anthony," she said when he came back on the line, "before you book another flight, connect me with Victoria Zhang. I need our legal team mobilized immediately." As she ended the call, Jasmine straightened her shoulders and took a deep breath. Skylight had just made the biggest mistake in their corporate history, and they didn't even know it yet. What would you do if you were publicly humiliated and discriminated against by a major corporation? Would you walk away to avoid further confrontation? Or would you stand your ground and fight for justice? Comment number 1 if you believe Jasmine should pursue legal action against Skylight, or number 2 if you think she should focus on making it to her meeting and deal with the discrimination later. Like this video if you've ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly because of their race, and subscribe to hear stories about people who refuse to be victimized. Victoria Zhang, Nextech's chief legal officer, didn't waste time with pleasantries. When she joined the conference call 30 minutes later, Jasmine had relocated to an airport lounge after purchasing a day pass, needing privacy for this conversation. "This is textbook discrimination," Victoria stated after hearing the details. "We have multiple causes of action: racial discrimination, breach of contract, assault and battery from the security officers, property damage to your laptop, potentially even false imprisonment. The question isn't whether we have a case. We absolutely do. The question is what outcome you want to achieve." Jasmine considered this. "I want accountability, not just compensation. This isn't the first time Skylight has done this. I'm certain of it." "Let me have the team pull records," Victoria replied. "If there's a pattern, we can build an even stronger case." Within the hour, Victoria had preliminary findings to report. Skylight has settled at least 12 discrimination complaints in the past 3 years. All confidential, of course, but our team found court filings before the cases were sealed. They follow a pattern: minority passengers, particularly black passengers, being removed from flights or denied services under questionable circumstances. "Why hasn't this gotten more attention?" Jasmine asked. "Standard corporate playbook," Victoria explained. "Quick confidential settlements with non-disclosure agreements. Most individuals can't afford to fight a prolonged legal battle against a corporation, so they take the money and sign the NDA." Anthony joined the call with another piece of information. "I ran a background check on Walter Kensington III. He's not just a random passenger. He's a minor shareholder in Skylight's parent company and sits on their advisory board." "That explains the preferential treatment," Jasmine said. "But it makes their actions even worse. They didn't just discriminate. They did it to favor someone with financial ties to the company." "There's more," Anthony continued. "I was reviewing our banking relationships for rebooking your flight when I noticed something interesting. Nextech's banking partner, Global Financial, is currently processing a $120 million loan transaction for Skylight. They're financing a fleet expansion." The line went silent as the implications sank in. "Victoria," Jasmine finally said, What's our relationship? With Global Financial like? Rock solid. We've moved over 300 million through them in the past year alone. They consider us a premier client. And if a premier client expressed concerns about another client's business practices, Victoria caught on immediately. They would take those concerns very seriously, especially with the current focus on ethical banking practices. Could we request a hold on Skylight's transaction pending an investigation into their discriminatory practices? Jasmine asked. It's aggressive, Victoria admitted. But yes, we have enough leverage to make that request, especially with documentation of what happened today. The bank would likely freeze the transaction temporarily while they conduct due diligence. That would immediately impact their operations, Anthony noted. They're counting on that financing for their new planes and terminal expansion. Jasmine nodded slowly. I don't want to abuse our financial position, but I also won't stand by while they continue to discriminate with impunity. This isn't just about me. Let's take a calculated approach, Victoria suggested. We'll prepare both legal action and the banking inquiry simultaneously. Before we proceed with either, let's gather more evidence. Can we find witnesses from the flight? Dr. Maya Johnson spoke up for me, Jasmine remembered. She offered to be a witness. Anthony was already typing. I'll find her contact information. Also, request the surveillance footage from the terminal and boarding area, Victoria instructed. That should capture at least part of the incident. We need to move quickly before it's accidentally deleted. There's one more thing, Jasmine said. I need to get to San Francisco for this investor meeting. It's too important to miss. I've booked you on a competitor airline, Anthony assured her. Departs in 2 hours. You'll make it to San Francisco tonight with enough time to rest before tomorrow's meeting. Good, Jasmine said. While I'm in the air, I want our team to find out if there are other executives who've experienced similar treatment from Skylight. If this is systemic, I want to know about it. Within hours, the strategy was taking shape. Dr. Maya Johnson had been contacted and agreed to provide a statement. The legal team had filed emergency requests for preservation of evidence, including security footage. 3 other black executives had already come forward with similar experiences after Anthony reached out to Jasmine's professional network. Most significantly, Victoria had drafted a formal letter to Global Financial, expressing grave concerns about Skylight's discriminatory practices and requesting a temporary hold on any financial transactions until a full investigation could be conducted. As Jasmine boarded her new flight to San Francisco, she received a text from Victoria. Documentation submitted to Global Financial. Their compliance team is reviewing immediately. We'll update when I hear back. Jasmine settled into her seat, mind racing with both the upcoming investor presentation and the battle she had just initiated. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been humiliated, dismissed, or mistreated because of the color of their skin. What would you do if you had the power to hold a corporation accountable for discrimination? Would you use every tool at your disposal, or would you worry about potential backlash? And what do you think will happen when Skylight discovers who they've messed with? Stay tuned for what happens next in this incredible true story of power, prejudice, and the fight for justice. The next morning, Jasmine woke up in her San Francisco hotel room to an urgent message from Victoria. Global Financial has placed a 72-hour hold on Skylight's transaction pending review. Their compliance team wants a full briefing today. Despite the looming investor meeting, Jasmine called an emergency virtual board meeting for Nextech Solutions. She needed their support before proceeding further. The board members appeared one by one on the secure video conference. Most were still in pajamas or robes due to the early hour and short notice. I apologize for the urgency, Jasmine began, but I need your input on a situation that's developing rapidly. She detailed the discrimination she'd experienced and the actions taken so far. Board member Harold Winters spoke first. While I sympathize with your experience, Jasmine, I'm concerned about using our banking relationships as leverage. It could be perceived as corporate bullying or even market manipulation. I understand those concerns, Jasmine replied. But consider this from a different perspective. We've always positioned Nextech as a socially responsible company. We donate 20% of our profits to STEM education in underserved communities. We have industry-leading diversity initiatives. Yet we're considering looking the other way when a company we do business with engages in blatant discrimination. Another board member, Diana Rodriguez, nodded. Harold raises valid points about perception, but so does Jasmine. Our commitment to social responsibility can't just be when it's convenient. There's also the practical consideration, added board member James Chen. If this incident becomes public, which it likely will, how will it look if we took no action, despite having the leverage to do so? The reputational damage could be significant. The discussion continued for nearly an hour, with board members weighing the risks and benefits of various approaches. Finally, Jasmine called for a decision. "I'm not asking for carte blanche to wage personal vendettas," she said. "I'm asking for your support in using our corporate influence to address systemic discrimination. If the situation were reversed, and Skylight discovered unethical practices at Nextech, wouldn't we want them to hold us accountable?" The vote was unanimous. The board authorized Jasmine to proceed with both the banking inquiry and legal action as needed, with appropriate oversight from the legal and compliance teams. With the board's support secured, Jasmine coordinated with Victoria to provide global financial with all the evidence they had gathered. The bank's compliance team was particularly interested in the pattern of previous settlements and the eyewitness account from Dr. Johnson. By mid-afternoon, the effects were already being felt. Skylight's planned announcement of their fleet expansion had been indefinitely postponed. Rumors began circulating in financial circles about potential cash flow problems. The company's stock price dipped 3% by closing bell. Through it all, Jasmine maintained her focus on the investor meeting. She presented Nextech's international expansion strategy with her characteristic brilliance and attention to detail. The consortium was impressed, not just by the financial projections, but by the company's commitment to creating technological infrastructure in developing regions. "You've clearly done your homework," the lead investor said as they wrapped up. "We'll need to review the details with our teams, but I believe we have the foundation for a very promising partnership." As Jasmine was leaving the meeting, her phone buzzed with a notification. Skylight's stock had dropped another 4% in after-hours trading, as news of the delayed financing spread through investment circles. Minutes later, her assistant called. "Richard Thornton, Skylight's CEO, has been trying to reach you. He's called 6 times in the past hour." "Interesting," Jasmine said. "Has he left any messages?" "Just that it's urgent and involves a misunderstanding that he'd like to clear up personally." "I bet he would," Jasmine replied. "Tell his office I'm in meetings all day and will return his call when my schedule permits." The strategic delay was intentional. Every hour that passed without resolution increased pressure on Skylight. By the time Jasmine finally spoke with Thornton, he would be desperate for a solution. That evening, as Jasmine was reviewing the day's developments with her team, Victoria shared another update. Social media is starting to pick up on the story. Someone on the flight posted about seeing a black woman being removed to make room for a white man. They didn't name you specifically, but it's gaining traction. Boycott Skylight is trending in 3 cities. "We should prepare a statement in case I'm identified," Jasmine said. "But let's wait to release anything until we have a clearer picture of Skylight's response." As she ended the call, Jasmine gazed out her hotel window at the San Francisco skyline. In less than 48 hours, she had gone from being publicly humiliated to leveraging her company's financial power to demand accountability. Skylight had assumed she was just another passenger they could mistreat without consequences. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Richard Thornton was about to discover that the woman his airline had thrown off a flight wasn't just any passenger. She was a formidable CEO with the resources and determination to hold his company accountable. And this was just the beginning. By the following morning, Skylight's response had materialized, and it was aggressive. Their PR team released a statement claiming that a disruptive passenger had been removed after threatening staff and refusing to comply with crew instructions. They carefully avoided mentioning race, but the implication was clear. They were painting Jasmine as the stereotypical, angry black woman. More disturbing was the edited security footage that somehow leaked to a transportation blog. The clip showed only the final moments of the confrontation, when Jasmine was standing and gathering her belongings, conveniently omitting the preceding events that led to her removal. "They're trying to control the narrative," Victoria observed, during their morning briefing. "Standard crisis management. Release your version first and make the victim look like the aggressor." "We anticipated this," Jasmine replied calmly. "It's time for our counter-response." Their first move was releasing the full security footage, which Nextech's legal team had obtained through an emergency court order. The unedited video told a very different story, clearly showing Kensington arriving late, demanding Jasmine's seat, and the crew immediately taking his side without checking tickets properly. Simultaneously, Dr. Maya Johnson released a public statement as an eyewitness. As a respected neurologist with impeccable credentials, her account carried significant weight. "What I witnessed on that Skylight flight was textbook racial discrimination. A black female executive was sitting quietly in her assigned seat when a white male passenger demanded it. Instead of checking his ticket and directing him to his actual seat, the crew immediately sided with him and eventually had the black passenger forcibly removed. I've flown over 2 million miles in my career, and I've never seen such blatant discrimination. I'm speaking out because remaining silent would make me complicit." The combined effect of the full footage and Dr. Johnson's statement quickly shifted public perception. By noon, our boycott Skylight was the top trending topic nationwide, with travelers sharing their own experiences of discrimination on the airline. Skylight's board called an emergency meeting as their stock plummeted another 8%. Shareholders were demanding answers, and corporate clients were beginning to distance themselves from the airline. Richard Thornton, feeling the pressure mounting, authorized an aggressive legal counteroffensive. By mid-afternoon, Skylight had filed a lawsuit against Nextech Solutions and Jasmine personally, alleging market manipulation, tortious interference with business relationships, and defamation. "They're getting desperate," Victoria said when the lawsuit was served. "These claims are baseless, but they're hoping to intimidate us and shift focus from the discrimination issue." More concerning were the reports that Skylight representatives had approached Dr. Johnson, suggesting that her medical practice could face complications if she continued to speak out. Similar tactics were being used with the other witnesses who had come forward. Meanwhile, Walter Kensington gave an interview to a business publication, claiming he had no recollection of requesting Jasmine's specific seat and suggesting the entire incident was a misunderstanding escalated by an oversensitive individual looking for special treatment. In a transparent attempt to deflect blame, Skylight announced that Beverly and Thomas had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. This move, clearly designed to present the incident as the actions of individual employees, rather than systemic discrimination, backfired when both employees hired their own lawyers and hinted they had been following company protocols. Throughout the day, Jasmine maintained her focus, dividing her time between follow-up discussions with the investors and strategic planning with her legal and PR teams. She refused interview requests, preferring to let the evidence speak for itself while Skylight floundered in increasingly desperate attempts to control the damage. "They've made 3 critical mistakes," Jasmine observed during the evening strategy session. "First, they assumed I wouldn't have the resources to fight back. Second, they tried to lie when video evidence exists. And third, they're attacking the witnesses instead of addressing the underlying discrimination." Anthony, who had been monitoring social media sentiment, reported that public opinion was overwhelmingly against Skylight. "Their attempts to portray you as aggressive have completely backfired. People are pointing out the racist trope of the angry black woman and calling them out for perpetuating stereotypes." Victoria added, "Global Financial's compliance team has extended their hold on the loan transaction indefinitely. They've requested meetings with Skylight's executive team to discuss ethical concerns." By nightfall, the crisis had escalated to the point where several major corporate clients announced they were reviewing their travel contracts with Skylight. The company's market value had decreased by nearly $300 million in 2 days. As Jasmine prepared for her return flight to Detroit the next day, pointedly booked on Skylight's main competitor, she received word that Richard Thornton had issued yet another statement, this time attempting a different approach. Skylight takes all allegations of discrimination extremely seriously. While we believe this incident has been mischaracterized, we are committed to a full and transparent investigation. We have reached out to Ms. Reynolds to discuss her concerns directly. The shift in tone was telling. Skylight was beginning to realize they had picked a fight they couldn't win. But for Jasmine, a half-hearted statement was nowhere near sufficient. She wasn't interested in platitudes or token gestures. She wanted systemic change, and she had the leverage to demand it. As she settled into her hotel room for her final night in San Francisco, Jasmine reflected on how quickly the power dynamic had shifted. 2 days ago, she had been humiliated and forcibly removed from an airplane. Now, a multi-billion-dollar corporation was scrambling to contain the damage she could inflict. The battle was far from over, but one thing was becoming increasingly clear. Skylight had made a catastrophic mistake when they decided Jasmine Reynolds didn't belong in first class. What would you do if standing up for justice meant putting your personal safety at risk? How much would you be willing to sacrifice to change a broken system? Comment number 1. If you believe the fight for equality is worth any personal cost. Or number 2, if you think self-preservation should come first. Like this video if you admire Jasmine's courage, and subscribe to hear more stories about extraordinary people challenging the status quo. The victory Jasmine was achieving in the public arena came with a heavy personal price. As she returned to Detroit the following day, the full weight of the situation began to take its toll. Her email inbox was flooded with hundreds of messages. Many were supportive, people sharing their own experiences with discrimination and thanking her for taking a stand. But mixed among them were violent threats and vicious racial slurs, some including her home address and personal information that should have been private. "We need to take these seriously," Anthony said, forwarding the most concerning messages to their security team. "Some of these people sound unhinged." Nextech's head of security, former FBI agent Raymond Washington, implemented immediate protective measures. "I'm assigning a security detail to your home and office," he informed Jasmine, "and we should discuss temporary relocation until the situation stabilizes." The thought of leaving her home due to threats was infuriating, but Jasmine knew Raymond was right. Safety had to come first. "What about my family?" she asked, thinking of her mother who still lived in Detroit. "Already covered," Raymond assured her. "We've stationed plainclothes security near your mother's house, and we're monitoring all approaches. She won't even notice they're there unless there's a problem." The threats weren't limited to anonymous emails. As the story gained national attention, extremist online forums began targeting Jasmine specifically, calling for boycotts of Nextech and spreading false information about her personal life and business practices. Physical security was only one aspect of the strain. The emotional and psychological toll was equally challenging. Jasmine had always prided herself on her ability to compartmentalize, to separate business challenges from personal feelings. But this was different. This wasn't just business. It was a direct attack on her identity, on her right to exist in spaces historically reserved for white men. At night, alone in her secured apartment, the memories surfaced, not just of the recent humiliation on the plane, but of a lifetime of similar incidents. The elementary school teacher who assumed she couldn't handle advanced math, the college advisor who suggested more realistic career goals, the countless times she'd been mistaken for administrative staff in her own company's offices. The physical symptoms began manifesting next: difficulty sleeping, loss of appetite, headaches that wouldn't subside, a constant state of hypervigilance that left her exhausted but unable to relax. Victoria noticed the change during their daily strategy call. "Jasmine, when was the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" "I'm fine," Jasmine insisted. "We need to focus on their latest legal maneuver." "You're not fine," Victoria countered gently, "and you don't have to be. What you're doing is incredibly difficult. No one expects you to be superhuman." The pressure extended beyond Jasmine herself. Some of Nextech's more conservative business partners began quietly distancing themselves, concerned about being associated with a company embroiled in controversy. Nothing overt, just meetings suddenly rescheduled, decisions unexpectedly delayed. Anthony remained fiercely loyal, working around the clock to manage both the crisis and Jasmine's regular CEO responsibilities. But even he couldn't shield her from everything. "The board is getting nervous calls from some investors," he reported reluctantly. "Nothing actionable yet, but there's concern about potential impact on the company's valuation if this drags on too long." Victoria added, "And Skylight's lawyers are pursuing aggressive discovery in their lawsuit. They're demanding access to your personal communications going back 5 years, claiming they need to establish pattern and intent." It was a classic intimidation tactic: invade privacy, increase legal costs, drag out proceedings until the victim gives up from exhaustion. Late one evening, after another grueling day of legal meetings and crisis management, Jasmine found herself seriously questioning whether the fight was worth the cost. She had initiated this battle on principle, but was she putting her company, her employees, and even her own safety at risk? Would it be easier to accept a private settlement, sign an NDA, and move on? The doubt gnawed at her as she stared out the window of her temporary apartment, security guards stationed discreetly outside. Her phone rang, displaying her grandmother's number. Emma Reynolds had raised 3 children during the height of segregation, had marched with Dr. King, and at 87, still volunteered 3 days a week teaching literacy in underserved communities. "I saw you on the news," her grandmother said without preamble. "You look tired, baby." "I am tired, Grandma," Jasmine admitted, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "I didn't ask for this fight." "None of us ever do," Emma replied softly. "Your grandfather didn't ask to be beaten for trying to register to vote. I didn't ask to be fired from teaching for supporting integration. The fights find us, baby. The sole question is what we do when they do." "But it's not just about me," Jasmine said. "I'm putting my company at risk. People are depending on me for their livelihoods." "Let me tell you something," Emma said. "When I was teaching in the 60s, my principal called me in and said I had to choose between my job and marching for civil rights. Said I was putting the whole school at risk. Know what I told him?" "What?" "I said, what good is security if we get it by letting others be treated as less than human? What example am I setting for my students if I choose comfort over justice?" Jasmine felt tears forming. "It's so hard, Grandma." "It's supposed to be hard," Emma replied. "If it was easy, it would have been fixed long ago. But you're not alone in this fight. Never think you are." As if to confirm her grandmother's words, Jasmine's phone began buzzing with notifications. A coalition of Black business leaders had issued a joint statement supporting her and condemning Skylight's actions. Among the signatories were some of the most powerful executives in the country, including several who sat on boards of companies that did business with Skylight. The next morning, 3 major corporations announced they were suspending their corporate travel contracts with Skylight, pending the resolution of the discrimination allegations. The message was clear: Jasmine wasn't standing alone. Reinvigorated, she called Victoria. "We're not settling. We're seeing this through to the end. Not just for me, but for every person who's ever been told they don't belong." Victoria's response was immediate and firm. "I never doubted you for a second. We're with you all the way." The road ahead would remain difficult. The threats wouldn't stop overnight. The stress wouldn't magically disappear. But Jasmine had rediscovered her purpose. This wasn't just a personal vendetta. It was part of a much larger, much more important fight for equality and dignity. And that was a fight worth any cost. The turning point came 3 days later when investigative reporter Sophia Chen contacted Jasmine's team. Chen had built her reputation exposing corporate malfeasance and had recently joined a major news network. "I've been following your situation with Skylight," Chen explained during their initial call. "But I think there's a bigger story here. I've received information from a whistleblower inside the company suggesting that what happened to you was not an isolated incident, but part of an unofficial policy." After verifying Chen's credibility, Jasmine agreed to an on-camera interview with conditions. The focus would be on systemic discrimination in the airline industry, not just her personal experience, and Nextech's financial actions would be presented. In context, The interview was scheduled for prime time the following evening. Jasmine prepared meticulously, working with her communications team to ensure her message would be clear, factual, and impossible to dismiss. When the cameras began rolling, Jasmine appeared poised and professional in a tailored navy suit, her natural hair styled elegantly. She spoke with quiet authority, recounting the incident without embellishment, letting the facts speak for themselves. "This isn't about a seat on an airplane," she explained. "It's about dignity. It's about the right to be treated equally regardless of race. When I refused to give up my rightfully assigned seat to accommodate a white man, I was physically removed from the plane, but I was not going to quietly accept being treated as a second-class citizen." Chen then revealed what her investigation had uncovered: internal Skylight communications suggesting a pattern of preferential treatment for wealthy white passengers at the expense of minorities. The whistleblower had provided emails referencing an unwritten VIP accommodation policy that instructed staff to prioritize certain passengers, predominantly white, predominantly male, when conflicts arose. The interview, combined with the new evidence, exploded across traditional and social media. Within hours of airing, the segment had been viewed over 15 million times online. Justice for Jasmine began trending alongside Dachar Boycott Skylight. News outlets across the political spectrum picked up the story, some focusing on the discrimination angle, others on the business implications of Skylight's plummeting stock value. Walter Kensington found himself caught in the spotlight as well. Internet sleuths quickly uncovered his history of complaints against service workers, previous incidents of demanding special treatment, and his connections to Skylight's board. His company's social media accounts were flooded with negative comments, forcing them to temporarily shut down their online presence. Skylight's attempts to control the narrative completely collapsed when Beverly and Thomas, the flight attendant and manager who had removed Jasmine from the plane, broke ranks. Facing the possibility of becoming scapegoats, they provided statements confirming that they had been following unwritten company protocols prioritizing certain passengers based on status, protocols that had a disproportionate impact on minority travelers. "We were trained to recognize our kind of people," Beverly admitted in a follow-up interview. "It was never explicitly about race, but the examples we were given in training made it clear who they meant." Internal documents began leaking from multiple sources within Skylight, revealing a troubling pattern of discrimination complaints that had been buried or settled quietly. The documents also showed that customer service metrics were evaluated differently for complaints from minority passengers versus white passengers. As public outrage intensified, congressional leaders called for investigations into discriminatory practices in the airline industry. The Department of Transportation announced it would conduct a comprehensive review of passenger rights and airline compliance with anti-discrimination laws. Skylight's biggest corporate clients, facing their own potential PR disasters by association, began suspending or canceling their contracts. Within a week of the interview airing, Skylight had lost nearly 30% of its corporate business. Richard Thornton attempted damage control with a video statement that somehow managed to make things worse. Looking uncomfortable and reading stiffly from a teleprompter, he offered a generic apology to anyone who felt they were treated unfairly, while insisting that Skylight was committed to diversity and inclusion. The non-apology was immediately torn apart by commentators, further damaging the company's reputation. Behind the scenes, Skylight's board members were turning against Thornton. Anonymous sources reported heated arguments during emergency board meetings, with several directors blaming Thornton's handling of the crisis for the company's rapid deterioration. Throughout the media firestorm, Jasmine maintained a strategic approach, accepting select speaking engagements where she could address corporate accountability and racial equity more broadly. She was careful to frame the issue not as a personal vendetta against Skylight, but as part of a necessary conversation about systemic discrimination. "This isn't about punishing one company," she explained during a business forum. "It's about changing a culture that allows discrimination to thrive. Every corporation has a responsibility, not just to prohibit discrimination in their policies, but to actively prevent it in their practices." The message resonated far beyond the original incident. Business schools requested case studies on Nextech's approach to corporate social responsibility. Civil rights organizations reached out to partner on initiatives. Other executives began examining their own company's practices with fresh eyes. What had begun as a humiliating experience for one black executive had evolved into a national conversation about race, power, and accountability in corporate America. And at the center of it all was Jasmine Reynolds, no longer just a successful tech CEO, but now a reluctant yet effective voice for change. As the second week of the crisis drew to a close, Jasmine received a message from Richard Thornton's office. The Skylight board had authorized him to request a face-to-face meeting to discuss an amicable resolution to our current differences. The tone was markedly different from the threatening legal notices of the previous week. There was no mention of lawsuits or allegations. Instead, the message conveyed a distinct note of desperation. Skylight was ready to negotiate, but Jasmine was no longer interested in a quick settlement. She was aiming for fundamental change, and now she had the leverage to demand it. The meeting was scheduled at Nextech's headquarters in Detroit, a deliberate choice that forced Richard Thornton to come to Jasmine's territory. The symbolism wasn't lost on either party. The power dynamic had completely reversed since their first indirect encounter. Jasmine strategically selected a conference room with glass walls overlooking the main work area, where Nextech's diverse workforce could see the Skylight delegation arrive. She wanted Thornton to be acutely aware of the company culture she had built, one where inclusion wasn't just a buzzword, but a lived reality. Security was extensive. Both sides had agreed to bring limited teams. Jasmine would be accompanied by Victoria and two other executives, while Thornton would bring Skylight's chief legal officer and head of operations. All personal devices would be surrendered at the EU-DAR to prevent recording, and both parties had signed strict confidentiality agreements regarding the discussion. At precisely 10 o'clock, Richard Thornton and his team were escorted into the building. Thornton, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide his stressed appearance, looked significantly less confident than his public persona suggested. 2 weeks of corporate crisis had clearly taken a toll. Jasmine greeted them with professional courtesy but without warmth. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Thornton. Please have a seat." Once everyone was settled, Thornton attempted to establish control of the conversation. "Ms. Reynolds, I appreciate your willingness to meet. I think we both agree that this situation has escalated beyond what's beneficial for either of our companies." Jasmine simply nodded, letting the silence extend uncomfortably. Thornton continued, "We're prepared to offer a generous settlement to put this unfortunate incident behind us. $2 million, with no admission of wrongdoing on our part. In return, we would ask for a mutual non-disparagement agreement, and of course the release of the hold on our financing." Victoria exchanged a glance with Jasmine, who remained expressionless. "Is that all?" Jasmine asked after another calculated pause. "We believe it's a very fair offer," Skylight's legal officer interjected. "Well above standard compensation for this type of misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," Jasmine repeated, her tone making it clear how inadequate she found the characterization. "Mr. Thornton, let me be absolutely clear. What happened on your airline wasn't a misunderstanding. It was discrimination, and it wasn't an isolated incident." She nodded to her assistant, who distributed folders to the Skylight representatives. "This is a small sample of the evidence we've collected. 64 incidents over the past 5 years where passengers of color were removed from flights or denied services, under circumstances remarkably similar to what I experienced." Thornton opened the folder, his face darkening as he skimmed the contents. "We've also identified 7 former employees willing to testify about unwritten policies of preferential treatment," Jasmine continued. "And we have the email chain where your executive team discussed ways to manage discrimination complaints without changing actual practices." The Skylight team looked increasingly uncomfortable as Jasmine methodically detailed the evidence against them. Their initial confidence had completely evaporated. "Ms. Reynolds," Thornton said, his voice strained, "what exactly are you looking for here?" "Systemic change," Jasmine replied without hesitation. "Not just at Skylight, but industry-wide. Your company happens to be the starting point because of what you did to me, but this is about something much larger." She outlined her demands. A substantial financial settlement that would fund scholarships for minority students in business and aviation. A complete overhaul of Skylight's training and accountability systems. Diverse hiring targets with teeth. An independent oversight committee with real authority. And public acknowledgement of past discriminatory practices. These terms are unprecedented, Skylight's legal officer protested. No airline has ever agreed to this level of outside oversight. Perhaps that's why discrimination continues to be a problem, Victoria countered smoothly. The negotiations extended for hours, with multiple breaks for the Skylight team to confer privately. Jasmine remained firm on her core demands, while showing flexibility on implementation details. She wasn't interested in driving Skylight out of business. She wanted them transformed into an example for other corporations. As the afternoon wore on, Richard Thornton's resistance gradually weakened. The financial reality was undeniable. Skylight was losing millions each day the controversy continued. The loan transaction being on hold had created a cash flow crisis that threatened their entire operation. Even if they could eventually win in court, a prospect that seemed increasingly unlikely, the company might not survive that long. Just as they seemed to be making progress, the conference room door opened, and Walter Kensington III stormed in, flanked by 2 Skylight board members. "This is extortion," Kensington declared loudly, ignoring the security officers who had immediately moved to intercept him. "You're trying to destroy a great American company because you couldn't handle being asked to change seats." The room froze. Thornton looked mortified. "Walter, this is not the time." "No, Richard. You're capitulating to her demands without a fight," Kensington interrupted. "The board won't stand for it." Jasmine stood slowly, her calm demeanor unbroken. "Mr. Kensington, how fitting that you should join us. You were, after all, the catalyst for this entire situation." She turned to address everyone in the room. "Let's be completely clear about what happened. Mr. Kensington didn't just ask me to change seats. He demanded my assigned seat, and your staff enforced that demand because he was white and wealthy, while I was black and therefore assumed to be less important, despite my actual status as a CEO and frequent first-class passenger." Turning back to Kensington directly, she continued. "And this wasn't the first time, was it? We've uncovered 7 other incidents where you demanded accommodations that inconvenienced other passengers. The difference is that I had the resources to fight back." Kensington's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "You have no right." "I have every right." Jasmine cut him off, her voice still measured but carrying unmistakable authority. "Rights that you and Skylight attempted to deny me. Rights that many others were denied before me because they lacked the means to challenge you." She addressed the Skylight board members who had accompanied Kensington. "Gentlemen, you have a choice to make. You can continue defending discriminatory practices and watch your company crumble, or you can be part of meaningful change that might actually save Skylight while doing something positive for society." The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. The stark choice laid out before them was undeniable. After a moment, one of the board members nodded almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Kensington," he said quietly, "I think you should leave now. The board has authorized Mr. Thornton to negotiate in good faith, and we intend to honor that decision." Security escorted a still protesting Kensington from the room, his influence finally trumped by financial reality. The negotiations resumed with a noticeably different tone. The Skylight team now engaged in genuine problem-solving rather than damage control. By evening, they had the framework of an agreement that would fundamentally change not just Skylight's policies but potentially set new standards for the entire industry. As the meeting concluded, Richard Thornton offered his hand to Jasmine. "For what it's worth, Ms. Reynolds, I am truly sorry for what you experienced on our airline." Jasmine accepted the handshake with professional courtesy. "Mr. Thornton, this was never about an apology to me. It's about ensuring no one else has to experience what I did. I hope Skylight will become a leader in that effort." As the Skylight delegation departed, Victoria turned to Jasmine. "You know, most people would have taken the $2 million and walked away." "Most people don't have the means to fight," Jasmine replied. "That's exactly why those of us who do have an obligation to use it." The agreement they had negotiated wouldn't just compensate Jasmine or repair Skylight's reputation. It would create lasting structural change that would benefit countless passengers in the future. And that, Jasmine knew, was worth far more than any personal settlement could ever be. 1 year later, Jasmine Reynolds stood in the first-class cabin of a Skylight flight, observing the changes that had transformed the airline. The settlement agreement, finalized after 2 more weeks of intensive negotiation, had resulted in a comprehensive overhaul that was now being studied in business schools nationwide. The financial compensation had been substantial, not to Jasmine personally, but to a newly established foundation for advancing minority representation in aviation and technology. The Reynolds Innovation Scholarship now supported 50 students annually, creating a pipeline of diverse talent for an industry that had long suffered from homogeneity. More importantly, Skylight had implemented structural changes that went far beyond the typical corporate diversity initiatives. Every employee, from the CEO to the newest hire, underwent extensive anti-bias training developed in partnership with civil rights organizations. The training wasn't a one-time checkbox, but an ongoing program with regular assessment and accountability. Beverly and Thomas, the flight attendant and manager who had removed Jasmine from the plane, had indeed been terminated, not as scapegoats, but because they had refused to participate in the new training programs, clinging to their discriminatory attitudes. Most other employees had embraced the changes, particularly as they saw improved workplace culture and customer satisfaction metrics. Richard Thornton had stepped down as CEO 6 months after the settlement, though publicly it was framed as a planned retirement. His replacement, Alicia Montgomery, was a respected aviation executive with a strong track record of ethical leadership. Under her guidance, Skylight had begun to rebuild its reputation, slowly regaining the corporate clients it had lost during the crisis. Perhaps most revolutionary was the independent oversight committee established by the settlement. Composed of civil rights leaders, industry experts, and passenger advocates, the committee had real authority to review policies, investigate complaints, and require changes when discriminatory patterns emerged. Preliminary data showed a 70% reduction in discrimination complaints across all Skylight operations. Dr. Maya Johnson, whose courageous testimony had been crucial to exposing Skylight's practices, now sat on the airline's board of directors, bringing both her professional expertise and her lived experience to governance decisions. The Reynolds Protocol had become industry shorthand for a comprehensive approach to preventing discrimination in customer service. Other airlines, seeing Skylight's eventual recovery and improved reputation, had begun adopting similar measures voluntarily. What had started as a crisis response at one company was evolving into a new standard for the entire industry. Walter Kensington III had faced his own consequences. The publicity surrounding his role in the incident had led to scrutiny of his business practices, revealing multiple ethical violations that resulted in his removal from several corporate boards. His reputation never recovered, and his influence in business circles was permanently diminished. As for Next Tech Solutions, the company had thrived. The international expansion deal had proceeded successfully, creating technological infrastructure and thousands of jobs in developing regions. Jasmine's handling of the Skylight incident had enhanced rather than damaged her reputation, establishing her as a CEO who could balance business success with ethical leadership. Today's flight was symbolic, Jasmine's first time back on Skylight since the incident. She had chosen to make the trip on the 1-year anniversary of the settlement announcement, wanting to see firsthand whether the changes were genuine or merely cosmetic. What she found was encouraging. The crew was noticeably diverse, the service consistently professional regardless of passengers' race or appearance, and the atmosphere markedly different from her last experience. When she boarded, the flight manager, a young black woman who had been promoted under the new leadership, had recognized Jasmine immediately. "Ms. Reynolds, it's an honor to have you with us today," she had said with genuine respect. "Your actions changed this airline for the better, and I personally wouldn't be in this position without the doors you opened." As the flight reached cruising altitude, Jasmine reflected on her grandmother's words during that moment of doubt. "The fights find us. The question is what we do when they do." 1 year ago, she had been forcibly removed from a plane because of her race. Today, she was flying that same airline as a respected customer, knowing that her refusal to accept injustice had created lasting change for countless others. It wasn't perfect. Discrimination hadn't been eliminated overnight, and vigilance would always be necessary. But real progress had been made, not through token gestures or empty promises, but through structural change backed by accountability. As the plane soared above the clouds, Jasmine opened her laptop to review Nextech's latest diversity initiatives. The fight for equality wasn't over, but today was proof that victory was possible, one battle at a time. What would you do if you witnessed discrimination in action? Would you speak up like Dr. Maya Johnson, or stay silent out of fear or convenience? Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on standing up against injustice. If this story inspired you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear that one person really can make a difference. Have you ever used your position or privilege to fight for change? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for joining me on this powerful journey through one of the most impactful racism stories of our time. And remember, true power isn't about having authority, it's about how you use it to create positive change in the world. Jasmine's journey teaches us that true power lies not in titles or wealth, but in the courage to stand against injustice. When faced with discrimination, she refused to accept being treated as less than, instead leveraging her position to create systemic change. The story demonstrates how institutional racism often hides behind policies and procedures, requiring both individual courage and structural reform to address effectively. We learn that accountability matters. Corporations must face consequences for discriminatory practices. The transformation at Skylight shows that meaningful change requires more than apologies. It demands revised policies, diverse leadership, independent oversight, and ongoing education. Perhaps most importantly, we see how speaking truth to power can ripple outward. Dr. Johnson's willingness to be a witness, the whistleblowers sharing internal documents, and the coalition of business leaders standing in solidarity all played crucial roles. Change rarely comes from one person alone. It requires a community willing to support justice. The story reminds us that fighting discrimination isn't just morally right, it benefits society as a whole. When barriers fall and talent is recognized, regardless of race, everyone gains from the contributions of those previously marginalized.